Thank you very much, and it's a delight to be here. Let me get started. Take a look at the background picture there. That's a typical morning in Beijing. The pollution is horrific. What does that have to do with climate change? I hope to show you that they are very closely linked. And in fact, since they go together, if we can address this, I think it's the best way to stop global warming. That's the bottom line. That's a strange case to make, and you won't hear very many other people making that case, but I'm hoping that within the next few years this will catch on, and people will recognize that by addressing the horrific air pollution, particularly in Beijing, in India, in the Middle East, that this is the best thing we can do to stop the climate change. That's this morning's air pollution in China. Actually, this was 8 a.m. It says 8 N, but it's 8 a.m. And you can go to our website, berkeley-earth.org. And you can get the hourly updates on air pollution in China, Japan, Taiwan. We hope to be doing more of the world soon. But how do I get into this? As was said, I was a climate skeptic. That changed. I wrote this op-ed in the New York Times describing the conversion of a climate change skeptic. The fact is, global warming is real. We began, because we felt these skeptics were raising valid issues, what we did, we got a group of scientists together and statisticians, some really excellent people. We got the raw data, we analyzed it from scratch. Here are our results very quickly. This is a record of the Earth's average temperature going back to 1753 up to the present. And yeah, these are the actual data going up and down, averaged over the globe. This is the estimate of the globe's average. The gray areas are the uncertainties. But the dark line there is the data. And this is sort of a running average of the data. You see these dips, those are volcanic eruptions. We know volcanic eruptions, because they put dust into the upper atmosphere, tend to obscure the sun, and they cause brief periods of cooling. But then the dust settles, and we're back to where we were. This rise here is what we call global warming. And we have it going back to 1753. The match in this is an excellent fit to carbon dioxide. It doesn't fit anything else. It doesn't fit the solar variability. Global warming is not due to changes in the sun. We can demonstrate that. This was published in a major journal, and it really is not disputed. What we did differently from the other groups is we took the skeptics seriously. We addressed all their major concerns. If there are skeptics, I love to talk to skeptics. I love to convince them that, not that other groups did everything right, even though I think they did, but that we did it right. And that global warming is real, and it's caused by humans, and that's the carbon dioxide. You see, it matches the data amazingly well. There are ups and downs, and there are bumps and wiggles. These are probably due to ocean currents. These little bumps are due to El Nino. These downward bumps are volcanic eruptions, and the rest is due to carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases. So global warming is real. By the way, global warming is real. Many of the other things attributed to climate change are not. Sea level rise is real, and it's due to humans. But almost everything you read in the newspapers, in my mind, it's your duty to be skeptical. Don't just accept, because I accept global warming, because I can demonstrate it's due to humans, because I think it's something we really should worry about, because I'm devoting my life to stopping it. People therefore mistakenly think that I believe in everything you see in the newspapers of climate change. In fact, I think most of it is not correct. I don't think Hurricane Katrina, Hurricane Sandy, don't think they were due to human causes. I don't think we're experiencing more droughts yet. But let's not get onto that. Let me show you this. Let me see if this movie works. I had a little bit of trouble with it earlier, and it may not play. But let me try to make it play here. There it goes. So this is our result, day by day, showing the way the climate around the Earth is changing. And look at it. Look at the way it pulses. Look at the way it varies. This is not global warming. This is hot spells and cold spells. You, as an individual, cannot sense global warming. I, as an individual, cannot sense global warming. If we think we can, we're fooling ourselves. Global warming has been 1.5 degrees of a rise in the last 250 years. There's no way you can be aware of such a small rise. When it's hot out, don't call that global warming. When there's a thunderstorm, don't call that global warming. To be able to even see global warming takes hundreds of different locations averaged over decades. It is real and it is dangerous, and I'm concerned about it. But don't fool yourself into thinking that every local weather storm is global warming. Look how it pulses, how it changes. It is getting warmer. And as you see, that's the rise down here. You see it's bouncing all over the place, and it has gone up. Here, look at that. It's a little bit higher. But, okay, now the other topic that I'm going to link to global warming. This is a photograph that I took in Beijing one morning. I call it the Beijing sunrise. And it gives you a little bit of a sense of how bad it is. Now, we have done a study of air pollution starting with China in great detail. It was published about 6 months ago. It's gotten a lot of attention. And I'm going to summarize the results in the next slide. Every day, the number of excess deaths due to air pollution is 4,400 every day. 4,000 people are dying, 4,400 people are dying in China every day due to the air pollution. Worse than that, nobody disputes what we are saying here. The World Health Organization came up with a similar number, not based on as much data as we had. So this is going, why is this not in the headlines every day? I mean, if a boat overturns somewhere and 50 people die, and that's newspaper headlines for a week. And yes, it's a tragic when that happens. But I can't help but think, and today 4,400 people died in China. How many people in India? We don't know because we don't have the data as well, but it's several thousand dying in India every day. This is the greatest catastrophe in the world today. And almost nobody's paying attention to it. You see newspaper headlines every now and then, bad day in Beijing, and you look at it and people say, oh boy, it's terrible, they should do something about it. Then you walk away and you worry about something minor. But this is a crisis in the world, and for the most part, we're not paying much attention. How many people die in the United States from air pollution? Best estimate is about 50,000 a year. Much, much less than in China. We're really clean compared to, this is a map. Anything that's green is healthy. Anything that is this magenta color is unhealthy. 1.6 million die every year in China from air pollution, just from air pollution. 4,400 per day. Being in Beijing is equivalent on a bad day to smoking 2 packs of cigarette. And that's even worse for children because they breathe more. People in China, if they are wealthy, try to get out because of the air pollution. This is going on. Why aren't we doing something about this? Some people say, oh, it's a Chinese problem. Well, yeah, if it were the pandas dying, would we say, oh, that's a Chinese problem? 38% of the population is exposed to unhealthy air on average. Okay, so what does this have to do with global warming? Well, it turns out, if we were to help China, India, and the developing world solve this problem, we will get a solution to global warming for free. And that's what I'd like to point out. What they have in common is coal. Coal is responsible for most of the global warming. It's also responsible for most of the air pollution. If we move away from coal, we get the solution to both problems. And I'll go into some more detail. This is the amazing thing about air pollution. Air pollution, if you look at from coal, how much of this kind of air pollution you get, the air pollution is called PM 2.5. How many people here had never heard the term PM 2.5? Just admit it. Okay, remember today, because this is going to become famous. PM 2.5, you're going to be hearing it all over the place in the coming years, and you will remember you heard it first here. PM, it means particulate matter, particles, particulate matter. The 2.5 refers to the size, 2.5 microns in size. That's about 1/10 the diameter of a human hair. And if you look at the particulate matter from coal compared to something like natural gas, it's huge. If you switch to natural gas, you reduce the air pollution. It would go away in China if they switched to natural gas. If they switched to nuclear, even better is energy conservation. If they get the same standard of living, the same benefit by using less energy, and that's really easy to do. What does energy conservation mean? Every time I give this lecture, I love to give the example from the lecture room. Okay, is it nighttime now? No, it's morning. Is the sun out? Yes. Why are the lights on? Because we have a room with no windows. Because electricity was so cheap that therefore we do this all with artificial light, even though there's lots of light outside. Can we save energy by being a little more thoughtful about how we use it? Yes. How much? God, most of it. For those of you who study physics, the first thing you learn, very counterintuitive, is horizontal motion takes no energy. It's all the friction. But if you overcome friction, horizontal. So why do we use so much energy on automobiles? All overcoming friction, inefficiency, air. Anyway, there's a huge amount that we can serve from energy conservation. So that's the biggest. The next thing we have to do, though, is to get off coal. China is anxious to get off coal. It's a drastic problem because of their air pollution. And if we can help them get off coal, through energy efficiency, through conservation, through switching away from coal to natural gas and nuclear, if we can help them do that, we have a much more effective solution to global warming than we can get from any other way that I know of. So that's how they're linked. Okay, so let's look at the solutions. This is China right now. That's their coal use. There's the oil. China is sometimes called a powerhouse for renewables. This is their hydroelectric. That's considered renewable. The solar energy in China is 0.06% of their energy use. It's a mistake to think that they are way advanced in solar power. It is tiny. It's mostly coal and oil. That's where their energy goes. This is they have to get off this onto something else. Are they going to get off this into the solar power? It's such a narrow line here, you can't even see it. I don't believe solar is going to be a solution for the next 20, 30 years in China. And yet people are dying 4,400 every day. This is the electricity use. Here's how it links to global warming. This is the United States energy, or rather carbon dioxide production from 1900 until now. Okay, that's the US production. This is the Chinese. China is growing. I believe they have every right to grow. I hope they continue to grow. I hope their economy doesn't stagnate. Their people, I believe, deserve to have a standard of living equal to ours. And they are headed that way. But in the process of doing it, they're producing huge amounts of carbon dioxide, twice ours. Let's make a projection. This is something I actually published in the Wall Street Journal. This is a projection. It dates back to the Kyoto meeting when the US promised we would drop, which we've been doing, And China said, we will grow no more than a particular rate. We will try to stay behind the economic growth by about 4%, which they've been doing. So they pledged a 4% cut, but not a 4% cut, a 4% cut compared to their 10% economic growth. Which means, according to the Kyoto Treaty and according to the recent agreements, they will continue going up. So take a look. Suppose the United States were to cut our emissions in half. Nobody's proposing that for the next 30 years, but let's just say we did it. Cut it to zero. US stops emitting altogether through some means. I don't know what it is, but let's just say we do that. So we go clunk to zero. What that means is the total would go clunk down to there. And then it would continue to grow, and in 4 years it would be back to where it was. This is if the United States goes away. If we vanish, the United States cannot stop global warming by actions that affect only the United States. We can't do it. We have lost control. Most of the global warming of the future is coming from the developing world. We have to be happy about that because it reflects their economic growth. They need the energy, but we have to help them get energy without carbon dioxide. Anything we do in the United States, carbon tax, I don't care what it is, you know, buy yourself a Prius. I have a Prius, okay? Negligible. The only solution that, if you talk about global warming and you don't mention China, you are not talking about a solution to global warming. Because you're forgetting the big emitter, China, India, the developing world. That's where most of this is coming from. That's not to blame them. I take great joy in their growth. But they don't have to emit all that carbon dioxide. With new technologies, with cleaner power plants, by switching away from coal, even to natural gas. Natural gas is still a greenhouse gas. The Sierra Club opposes the use of natural gas. I talk to the Sierra Club and I say, you can't oppose the use of natural gas in China. And they say, okay, we won't oppose it in China because it'll help both the air pollution and it'll help global warming. You can't just be against fossil fuels because the solar option is too far in the future. It's growing too slowly. You have to help the developing world, you have to help them be clean. China is adding enormous coal. There's some misinformation about this, but this is 2014, the last year from which we have data. This is the new energy they added in that year, and you can see 57% of the new energy is added in coal. They're growing enormously rapidly in coal. Here's their growth in solar. 3% of the new energy they added was in solar. The rest, most of it in coal. There's some hydro, some wind, and some nuclear. But that's the problem. India, similarly. So I have some numbers here on energy alternatives. Let me just point out that this is the cost of new natural gas. And come on, laser, go back on. Kick it. That worked. Yeah. Yeah, you have to kick it. Then, okay. So the problem here is solar is still too expensive. The cheapest form of energy is energy conservation. Anthony Lovins, or Amory Lovins, likes to call it negawatts, N-E-G-A watts. Energy that you don't use is really, really cheap. You don't have to pay for the energy. Energy conservation is we at Berkeley Earth went over to China to see what we could help them with. And we found that there are about 30 organizations helping China improve their energy conservation. Not much a small organization such as ours could add. Berkeley Earth is a nonprofit organization separate from the University of California. That way we get to keep the overhead. We're a small organization. We have been trying to help them with alternatives, with particularly natural gas and nuclear, both of which I consider the thing that every environmentalist should love. If you're an environmentalist, you should love natural gas and you should love nuclear, because in those lie the second and third best solutions to global warming, and they give you the solution to air pollution at the same time, and that's the greatest environmental catastrophe in the world today. So every environmentalist should love air pollution. We wrote a paper saying just that. I mean, not love air pollution, should love natural gas, and it's on our website, berkeley-earth.org. I am very pessimistic about the political process. This made headlines, historic greenhouse emission levels, and I just despaired. The agreement was that China would have no limits on the next 15 years. No limits whatsoever. But they would aspire 15 years from now to cap, to stop growing. And that's what their promise was. In other words, no limits whatsoever. In fact, there's an incentive for them to grow their coal as much as possible in the next 15 years. Because only in 15 years is there a limit, and that limit is not yet determined. It's where they happen to be 15 years from now. So there is an incentive for China to grow over the next 15 years their coal as much as possible. I was not very happy with this. And meanwhile, the U.S. is going to cut at a reasonable rate. But even the U.S. cut to zero, it wouldn't stop global warming. So I was really disappointed. Anything that is not focused on the developing world is not a solution to global warming. And that's not to blame them. We need to finance, to fund, to share technology, and we're not doing a very good job at that. The Chinese are trying to develop their shale gas, which would solve both problems, and they're getting almost no help from the United States. The nuclear, they're developing some nuclear reactors, but they're having trouble getting the technology that they need because the U.S. is putting export restrictions on some of our best technologies. So we're not helping, and that could really make a difference. Okay. I'm not a fan of the carbon tax. I wish it would work. It'll work beautifully in the United States. If you don't know about the carbon tax, I think you'll hear more about it tomorrow. My problem with the carbon tax is that the goal of the carbon tax is to raise the cost of energy. Eventually have it drop because everybody uses renewables, but immediately a carbon tax that's revenue neutral, ideally the carbon tax is never paid. Everybody switches to a more expensive form of energy, then there's no carbon tax. But it's more expensive energy. The goal is, if you go to the more expensive energy and everybody's using it, the price may come down, but there's a real limit to how much the price of solar and wind can come down. So there'll be more discussion of that tomorrow. I mentioned the solutions. I'm not a real fan of the carbon tax. In China, the carbon tax is paid by the utilities, which are owned by the government. They pay the carbon tax to the government. Not much of an incentive when the government is taking the money from one pocket and putting it into another. China says they already have a carbon tax and it's working. They say lots of things like that to make us feel good. But given the fact that it's all government, there's no incentive there. And they need to keep the energy prices low for fear that their economy will slow down. And that's their biggest fear, that the economy slow down. There are two things they fear in China, and I've been over there quite a few times recently. One of them is a slowdown in their economy, which they think could destabilize the government. And that's what the government fears more than anything else. The other thing that they fear is pollution. And so we have this conflict between a growing economy that takes more energy and pollution, which results from more energy. The solutions are, in my mind, largely energy conservation and a switch away from coal to natural gas and to nuclear, and they're having trouble making that switch because we're not helping them enough. How am I doing on time? I'm doing okay. There's a lot of opposition to fracking. Fracking is natural gas. And especially in the United States, maybe you've seen this video. This is a famous video from a movie, Gasland, and it's the most effective video for getting opposition to getting natural gas. The new natural gas method is to go down. There used to be big pockets of natural gas down there. Those are mostly exploited. Now what we do is we go down into the rock, into solid rock, and we extract natural gas from the solid rock, but it doesn't come out. So you fracture the rock. When you fracture the rock, then the gas gets into those cracks, and then you could pipe it out. What you do is you drill down a mile, you go horizontally for a mile, and you fracture the rock. Fracturing the rock typically 10, 20 feet on each side. A mile down, 10 or 20 feet. The earthquakes you get from this, you cannot feel on the surface. There are earthquakes associated with fracking, but not from the actual fracking. Get earthquakes from something having to do with the wastewater. And this is another hour talk, and we'll have a lot of discussion. And for those of you who are either really in favor of fracking or violently opposed to it, in the discussions, I can address all of your questions. I know a lot about fracking. I've talked to the experts. I have been to China on sites while they were fracking, watching them frack. So I know a lot about the subject. But what most people know is misinformation. So this is a movie from Gasland in which you could just watch it. Let's see if it plays. So this is from a home that is near a fracking location. And what he's doing is taking a match and putting it to the faucet of a water faucet. Let's see if the movie plays. Hope it will. There we go. So he puts a match to it. Woof! What the what? What was that? There's natural gas in his water supply, and he could light his faucet. And the movie blames this on fracking. The fracking got gas into the water supply, and this is what happens. And boy, this movie has inspired hundreds of thousands of people to violently oppose fracking. The state of Pennsylvania went and examined this to find out what was going on, and they determined that the natural gas was not actually coming from the fracking, that it was actually coming from some bacteria that are living in the soil close to the well. And for some reason, that information hasn't gotten out. You could tell natural gas from fracking. It has a different makeup than natural gas from the soil, and they could see that difference. Again, I can give you as much technical detail on that as you want. But they could tell this was not due to the fracking. And yet, in this movie Gasland, which is one of the most effective and powerful propaganda films of all time, has brought huge movement against natural gas. Natural gas, which can solve the air pollution problem in China. The producer of this movie is someone named Josh Fox, and there's a sound to go along with this, but there are subtitles. So this was a movie made of him when he gave a talk, and let's see if I can play this movie. Okay, so he says, but there's a report from 1976. I don't care about the report from 1976. They could light the water in New York State. Why didn't you include that in your movie? The relevant report from 1976. Why isn't it in the documentary? Most people watching your film think that lighting your water started with fracking. You say yourself, people have lit water since 1976. Isn't that right? Yes, but it's not relevant, he felt. Anyway, beware of, this is a time for you to exercise your skepticism of everybody. And when you exercise your skepticism, don't be selective. Don't pick your side that you like and then be skeptical of the other. That's the most common mistake made by people who are trying to be scientific. I like to think of that as, that's the lawyer's job in a courtroom. Because there are two sides here. They pick one side and they give all the arguments, and they kind of ignore the arguments on the other side. But as a scientist, you have to be skeptical of both sides. This is a case where I have been, and I've come out in favor of fracking. The paper we wrote, I actually brought some copies with me, not enough to give out, but we wrote an article. You can download it from our website, why every serious environmentalist should favor fracking. Nuclear too. There's shale oil everywhere. Okay, let's look at nuclear power. Fukushima, this is actually an article I wrote in the Wall Street Journal. Let's look at nuclear power. Why isn't it dead? Shouldn't Fukushima have killed nuclear power? Didn't we learn our lesson? Why are people still doing this? In particular, why is China doing it? The country in the world building the most nuclear reactors today, by far, is China. They have 32 new nuclear plants planned and under construction. 32. What's going on? Didn't they learn from Fukushima? Well, we know a lot about Fukushima. Well, most remarkable, let me ask each of you to think, how many people will die from the radiation released from Fukushima? I mean, they may not have died yet, but it induces cancer, and so eventually you die. So do we have an estimate for the number of people who will die from the radiation released in Fukushima? Have you heard a number? You haven't heard a number. It's true. I've looked far and wide for the number. Being a physicist, I know how to calculate it. You look at the radiation that was released, and there's a map of it. Very well done. US and Japan cooperated in making very accurate measurements of the radiation release. We know where the population is, and we know the radiation effect in producing cancer. So you can do the calculation. This was in my New York Times article. It's also in my book, Energy for Future Presidents. And in the end, we can calculate how many people got a low dose, how many people got a high dose, what is the probability of cancer, and in the end, here's the bottom line. We expect over the next 50 years, 28 cancers from the Fukushima release. Why haven't you heard that number? And then now we're getting into politics, why you haven't heard it. It's a lot easier to scare people about Fukushima if you don't mention that number. Here's a number you may have heard. How many people died from the tsunami? We know it was a minimum of 15,000 from the tsunami. And in Japan, I was over there, many people think it was closer to 20,000. And 28 from the radioactivity. Aren't we worrying about the wrong thing? Anyway, the Chinese look at this and they say, yeah, radiation is not that big a danger. What they need is to get rid of the air pollution. Waste storage, well, again, this is an hour talk. It's a greatly exaggerated problem. This is the radioactivity in a nuclear reactor when it's on. When it gets shut off, the chain reaction stops immediately, and that's where it went down to in Fukushima, 3 Mile Island, everywhere else. It drops dramatically. Then the residual radioactivity decays away. And after 100 years, it's at a level that I consider easily handled. It's still 100 times bigger than the uranium that was removed from the ground to make the reactor. But it's only 100 times bigger. And that uranium was not in a storage location, it was spread out over the ground in contact with groundwater. So we have to store it for 100 years, not 10,000 years. Saying you have to store it for 100,000 years, a million years, comes about only if you think the ground is not already radioactive. When the radioactivity is less than the radioactivity of the ground, you don't have to worry about it anymore. In fact, you didn't have to worry about it in the first place, because there's some areas like Denver that have much higher radioactivity than Florida, not because of any nuclear program, but simply because of the radioactivity in the ground. There's a lot of uranium in the ground near Denver. And people don't move to Florida from Denver because of the radioactivity. They do it for the climate. People move from Florida to Denver because they like the skiing. Nobody worries about these low levels of radioactivity. So this radioactivity scare is another bit of one of those things you need to be skeptical on. So I want to, because I've said so many things that depress you, we're going to end on a light note. People worry about the polar bears and global warming. It turns out the polar bears have not yet been threatened by global warming. They may be in the future, but they haven't been threatened yet. This was actually studied, it was brought to a court case. Al Gore wanted to distribute the movie Inconvenient Truth to every school in the UK. And a parent objected. They said this is a propaganda movie. So there was a court case. And a judge actually made a ruling. Well, the headlines in England. I have copies of the headlines if you want to see them. In the end, the judge had scientists come in. And one of the things the scientists discussed was whether polar bears were dying due to global warming. And the Gore group could not produce any credible scientists showing that a single polar bear had died from global warming. And the other group, the scientists, showed that the polar bears so far were thriving. Now, maybe in the future they'll die, but it hasn't happened yet. In the end, the judge decreed that Al Gore could indeed distribute his movie freely in the UK to every school, as long as it was accompanied by a list of 9 major mistakes in the movie. One of them being the polar bear thing. And they decided not to do that, which I think is a shame. I think it would have been really educational for them to get that. But for students to see the movie and then the list of the mistakes. But, okay, let's not, so the polar bears are not something to worry about yet. Let's get back to the pandas. They thrive only in China. I have visited the panda region. It is getting horrific air pollution. The pandas are suffering from air pollution. Instead of worrying about polar bears, worry about pandas. Let me show you a little film clip here, taken in Chengdu. I hope this plays okay. So there is a panda, and there is a scientist whom you might recognize. Watch this. Watch his hand. Look at that paw on my leg. Aww. By the way, they're not made out of cotton. They're made out of wool. They're actually quite rough when you rub your cheek against them. So, this will just loop and loop and loop, but you'll just keep on watching if it loops. So let me end with my photo of air pollution in China, and let me summarize. I mean, quick summary is let's save the pandas, but really, I think global warming is something we need to stop. Not because you can sense it, which you can't. Newspaper headlines, almost every newspaper headline on global warming is some alarmist drawing attention to some microclimate or weather condition and saying, well, this can be attributed to global warming. Yes, it can be. Not scientifically, but it can be attributed, and they do that. Not everything said by a scientist is science. They say, oh, I think this might be due to global warming, like Katrina and Sandy. But global warming is real, and I consider it a real threat. The rise so far is scary. A 1.5 degree rise so far. In the next 30, 40 years, we could rise another 1.5 degrees. It's accelerating. But keep in mind that the reason it's accelerating is because of the developing world. Economics is catching up to ours, and that's a good thing. We have to move them towards clean energy, but clean energy doesn't necessarily mean renewables. The hydroelectric in China displaced 1.3 million people. According to the Chinese, every single one of them did it voluntarily. That's China. Only in China can you get 1.3 million people, every one, agree to leave. There were 13 major cities destroyed from their hydroelectric dams, and they're building more. So renewables are not, in my mind, the solution. We need to have energy conservation, which is the biggie. We need to switch from coal to things the Chinese can afford, such as natural gas and nuclear. We need to, not only do we need to help them do this, but we need to set an example. Right now, all around the world, people are afraid to use nuclear because the United States is not using it. And how do you go to your small country in Africa and say, Mr. President, I advise we go nuclear? And the president says, why isn't the United States going nuclear? Are you as good as the scientists in the United States? And the guy probably better not say yes. So we need to set an example that the developing world can afford to follow. We need to help them do this. And if we do this, I don't think we do it through big treaties. I think we do it by helping them develop these technologies. And then I think we have a really good chance of stopping and even reversing global warming. I'm very optimistic about doing that. But again, we have to emphasize China, and the key to China is helping with their air pollution. We'll get global warming for free, and I'll end with that. Thank you very much.